Welcome to this tutorial on the principles of flight planning and data cartridge generation in the AJS37 Viggen. We will go over the structure of a basic Viggen flight plan and its components, the principles of waypoints and the various employable types, and in this particular tutorial, how we can generate data cartridges which contain the flight plan using the mission editor and F10 map. Hello fellow virtual aviators, contrary to popular belief I am not dead, but am still recovering from that nasty bout of illness, hence the delay in getting any more tutorial content out. Today we are back in the AJS37 Viggen, and we will be looking at the various methods for planning and designing our flight plans, the many considerations we need to make, and the different programming techniques we have the option of using to have the Viggen understand what we are trying to achieve with our mission. Hopefully you will have already watched the 3 previous installments of the series and have a good idea of how the Viggen is designed to work. The flight plan is absolutely essential for success in the Viggen's intended role, so it is vital we understand the numerous parameters attached to the flight plan data. This may take a number of tutorials to cover everything, but we will start with what I consider to be the fundamentals. So without further ado, notepads at the ready as we go through an introductory lesson on Viggen flight planning. Much like other advanced post-1960s aircraft, the Viggen navigates by way of waypoints. Each waypoint is a stored location within a defined coordinate system, from which the Viggen's CK37 central computer and its automatic dead reckoning program can measure distance and direction to and from, as we have seen in our doctrinal tutorial. Waypoints in the Viggen are two-dimensional. They are defined only by latitude and longitude. Unlike other aircraft such as the Mirage 2000C or F-16C, whose navigation systems also include an altitude element. Interestingly, in the Viggen, the convention is to describe the coordinate location of a waypoint using the longitude first. The reasons for this are disparate. Firstly, I have been informed that this is the convention used in the Swedish military. Secondly, the CK37 could detect which ordinate was the latitude and longitude regardless of the order they were inputted due to constraints placed on the possible values given the expected theatre of operations. And thirdly, as an inbuilt limitation within DCS World to help prevent data errors. Regardless, it is important to remember that coordinates are inverted in the Viggen. As an example, here we have a basic representation of the Caucasus map. The obvious benefit of using a waypoint-based navigation system is that a waypoint can be placed in just about any location, unlike radio navigation techniques which tend to be limited to a set of fixed positions. To record this waypoint for use, for example here at the city of Sochi, we would simply need to know its longitude and latitude coordinates. Data entry into the Viggen's CK37 uses the 6-digit degrees, minutes, second format. As the number of seconds is the limiting degree of precision, this means that when a waypoint is programmed in the Viggen, it is accurate to approximately 40 feet or 12 meters in longitude and 50 feet or 15 meters in latitude when rounded to the nearest second. For clarity, brevity, and simplicity, the Viggen's data cartridge is also loaded with predetermined waypoints corresponding to significant locations. The most important of these are air bases. For each map within DCS World, the coordinates of all the major air bases will have already been stored in a CK37 data address, under what is known as a reference. These references are invariably represented by a 4-digit code, beginning with the number 9. As these do not change, this speeds things up when programming a flight plan. As an example, the locations of Anapa Vityazevo and Maykop-Kanskaya airbases could be stored under references 9002 and 9015. Rather than laboriously finding and typing in the longitude and latitude of those airbases, we can simply tell the CK37 to look for and use the data under the addresses 9002 and 9015. A list of these references can be found on the kneeboard. In addition to airbases, various other locations corresponding to towns, cities, approach points, and common navigation points are also stored under other references, again typically as a 4-digit code beginning with a 9, which can be used to help speed up flight plan programming. In addition to their varying locations, there are different varieties of waypoint. These waypoint types determine how the waypoint behaves within the computer's calculations and how it functions within the flight plan. The waypoints are stored in different locations and are recalled and used using different buttons and modes on the data and navigation panel. At the absolute minimum, an LS waypoint should always be programmed, even if our intention is to simply take off and land. LS stands for Landningsfelt Start and marks the location of the runway of the departure airbase. In other words, we are telling the Viggen from where we will begin our flight plan. By default, the location of the LS waypoint is copied to the location of the L1 waypoint. L1 stands for Landningsfelt N and represents our expected arrival airbase. In other words, we are expecting to return to the same airbase after completing our flight. For sorties involving precision strike missions, we need a full flight plan. In the context of waypoints, B stands for Brytpunkt, and a B waypoint represents a normal navigation or steer point. As the Viggen typically flies at low level, these are often chosen to correspond with visible terrain objects such as buildings, bridges, or topographical features. The B waypoints constitute the main shape of the flight plan, referred to as the navigation polygon. These are the waypoints we will navigate to sequentially. Notice that the B waypoints are labelled with sequential numbers, representing the order in which they will be navigated. It is usual for one or more of the waypoints within the navigation polygon to be designated as a target point, which marks the assumed position of our strike target. This is done using an M waypoint. M stands for målpunkt, mål being the Swedish word for target, and any of our B waypoints can be changed to an M target point. The purpose of the M target point is primarily twofold. Firstly, so the computer can designate these target points in the HUD to direct the pilot, and secondly, the position of an M target point can be fixed and adjusted without affecting the rest of the polygon. Here, the waypoint over the chemical weapons factory has been changed to a target. Notice in changing waypoint B3 to M3, it has still maintained its sequential number, in other words labelled as M3 and not M1. As well as their geographical locations, it is possible to set additional parameters and attach them to L, B, and M waypoints, such as ingress speeds and times on target, in order to render the Viggen a true practitioner of the tactical strike mission. These we will briefly mention in this tutorial, but we'll look at these in more detail later. LS/L1, a sequence of B waypoints, and one or more M target points constitute a basic flight plan. But there are still other varieties of optional waypoints we may wish to consider. A U waypoint marks the location of a pop-up point and is attached to an M target point at a pre-programmed distance and bearing. The U pop-up point is used to plan approaches against fixed targets. For example, an attack down the length of a runway, or an attack from a particular direction to avoid defenses. A BX, or Brytpunkt X waypoint, describes a mark point. Mark points are used to identify the location of points of interest outside the navigation polygon. They do not form part of the sequential series of waypoints and are not factored into considerations such as fuel calculations, but otherwise are selectable and navigable just like other B waypoints. Mark points are labelled BX together with a number. L1, as you will recall, represents our landing airbase, usually the same as our LS starting airbase, but it is also possible to program an L2 waypoint, or secondary landing airbase. This is useful should we need to divert should the L1 airbase become unavailable or unreachable. These are the fundamental types of waypoint. As we continue to learn the Viggen, we will see that there are other subtypes of waypoints attached and subservient to these fundamental varieties, particularly when performing landing procedures. All that remains now is to learn how we can create and program flight plans of different combinations of waypoint types. So let's see how we can do this in and out of the cockpit of the mighty AJS37 Viggen. Okay, we are back in the cockpit. Heat Blur Simulations, the creators of the Viggen module, have generously given us numerous options that we can employ to create and load our flight plan. These include via the mission editor, via the manual placement of markers on the F10 map, via the automatic generation of a flight plan based on an assumed target on the F10 map, and by in-cockpit manual entry using the data panel. It is also possible to create a Lua file using a pre-existing format you will find in the DCS World files. Let's start with the mission editor. The flight plan information prepared in the mission editor will create a data cartridge based upon it for use in the cockpit. Firstly, before we proceed, mission creators have the possibility of limiting which types of data cartridge can be used under the Aircraft Additional Properties tab here. This is of course if you want to milsim your missions and stop players going off and doing their own thing. For our purposes, we will leave it set to Allow All. So here we have created a basic flight plan of a departure point in the customary Waypoint 0 as is used in the DCS World editor, followed by 6 other waypoints which culminate at a different airbase to where we started. We are starting at Incirlik and have the Waypoint 0 located here, currently set, as we can see, to takeoff from ramp. In doing so, this will ensure that the waypoint will be set as the LS departure waypoint. This also happens if we select takeoff from runway or takeoff from parking hot. Be cautious, however, as if we choose either of the takeoff from ground options, the LS waypoint will not be set automatically in the cartridge, meaning we would need to manually set LS once we're in the cockpit. By default, each of the other waypoints in the flight plan, which are set as turning points in the options, would create standard B navigation waypoints. However, we can force a waypoint such as these to act as an M target point by deselecting the ground speed option and selecting the fix time option, as shown here. So here we can see that we have done this with the third waypoint, and so we should expect to see M3 as the third waypoint in cockpit rather than B3. In this instance, we have set our arrival airbase to be different to the departure airbase, just to demonstrate that by setting a landing waypoint in the editor, this will automatically set the L1 primary landing base to the correct location. Within the mission editor, We can also set our BX mark points using the Navigation Target Points tab here. So let's add one of those to this spit of land just south of Zeitenbelly, as we can see. And to ensure that this point becomes stored as a mark point, we need to add a comment in the box, formatted as BX and then a number. So let's do BX1. This feature can also be used to program what are called router or R reconnaissance points, something we will look at further down the line. The data cartridge is automatically created as we load up the mission, so let's jump back into the cockpit and show that this has worked. Okay, the mission is loaded, and here we have already cold started our aircraft and are ready to load our flight plan. Now, to simulate starting with no information preloaded, we are going to depress the Renser Clear button whilst in Act Pos mode on the data panel. This will clear any existing waypoint data stored. As we can see, there is no longer any cycling coordinates on the data panel display, and the destination indicator is now reading B0, as in no waypoint. As shown in our previous episode, let's ensure that the correct data cartridge is selected on the kneeboard. Here we can see that we have 0 mission editor selected, which is the one that we want to load in this instance. So let's reach back and insert the cartridge. And let's run the data loading program by inputting the reference 9099 as we have seen previously. Confirm the selection with the LS SCU button. Sex00 now shows, indicating the data transfer has been successful, and the black and white flag on the fuel gauge has moved into a positive position, suggesting fuel calculations are now being carried out on a valid flight plan. We can now cycle through our waypoints and check the data within them as a quick acceptability check. Firstly, under Act Pos, our own position is being recorded not as the exact current location of the aircraft, but of the expected takeoff point on the runway, which will mark the start of the flight plan's kinematic measurements. When in Act Pos mode, only the first 4 digits are used to display coordinate positions. The last 2 digits are used to indicate the status of the turnout system and the estimated position error. So only the degrees and minutes are shown, even though the seconds component is still being used in the computer's calculations. Our departure airbase is in Čerlik, and our arrival airbase is Adana Sakyapasa, the data for which, as we have seen, is stored under a reference, in this case 9016 and 9002 respectively. This can be consulted and checked on the kneeboard. So let's bring up the kneeboard and advance to the airbases page, and we can see that Adana Sakyapasa, the reference is 9002, and in Čerlik the reference is 9016. Our quick acceptability check can be carried out by comparing the coordinate data on the kneeboard and the known references with the display on the data panel. The coordinates for each waypoint are displayed here on the pilot's sign-out sheet. Let's now confirm that this and the reference data is correct. So with LS selected on the navigation panel and LS displayed on the destination indicator, we can move the data panel mode dial to Ref Lola in out mode, and see that it says 9016, meaning our departure airbase is correctly set to in Čerlik. Returning the dial to Act Pos, and then selecting B1 on the navigation panel, we can read the waypoint's coordinates when the dial is once again set to Ref Lola in out mode. Notice that the 2 ordinates alternately flash, and the first digit flashes on one of them. The flight manual states that the ordinate with the flashing first digit is the latitude. However, this appears to be incorrect at the time of making this video. The flashing first digit is indicating the longitude. We can perform this sort of check for any of our programmed waypoints using the same procedure. For example here with waypoint B2. In our flight plan, our third waypoint was set as a target point, so we should expect to see M3 instead of B3 in the destination indicator upon its selection, which we do. Selecting the landing point with the L-mole button, bringing L1 up in the destination indicator, we can see that the data reference 9002 is attached to this waypoint, in other words the location of Adana Sakya Parsa. Let's return the switches to their default positions and reselect the LS waypoint. We also programmed a mark point under BX1. To select this, we press the BX button on the navigation panel, followed by 1 on the data panel. BX1 will display in the destination indicator, colored orange to remind the pilot that this point does not form part of the navigation polygon. Apart from this, its location can be checked in exactly the same manner as the other waypoint types. BX mark point data is not included on the pilot's sign-out sheet, so we would need to know the coordinates of such a point if we wish to double-check it. Using the mission editor has its advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, the flight plan can be programmed ahead of time, so has a quick application once in mission. When planning, it is map-based, so it is easy to visualize. And with the editor, it is also easy to program additional parameters, such as ingress speeds and times on target. The disadvantages include that it can only be programmed once per mission. It can be changed on multiplayer servers using the new root feature, but this requires an awkward despawn and respawn. Crucially, it cannot pre-plan U pop-up points or LS secondary landing points. These have to be achieved using other means. Our second method for creating a flight plan data cartridge is to use the F10 map when in simulation. This is useful when planning your own sorties within multiplayer servers, whereby the mission creator for the server may have given the Viggen slots a generic flight plan or none at all. The usual minimum when spawning into a server will be that the Viggen has been given a takeoff from ramp, takeoff from runway, or takeoff from parking hot waypoint, meaning LS will be correctly set. But it is possible that the remaining waypoints generated by the mission editor cartridge are missing, incorrect, or useless. In the F10 map, we can place markers with labels at any location to build our flight plan. Within the label, we need to identify each marker with the type of waypoint we wish it to serve as, the formatting for which we can see here. We can set B waypoints, M target points, BX mark points, and other types we have yet to look at, such as R router reconnaissance, S tracked reconnaissance targets, and MR recon target points. It is also possible to set airfields LS, primary landing L1, and secondary landing L2, although I prefer to set these with the preset references once back in the cockpit. So we can see here that we have already added a number of mark labels and included with them the appropriate label formatting. We have an LS, a B1, B2, M3, and a BX1 mark point. So let's add in another B waypoint, B4, by selecting the mark label, and let's just put it in that lake. And on the label, we're going to add B4. We have also set a final L2 secondary landing point at Adana Sakyapasa. In addition, we can add ingress speeds to B waypoints and time on target data to M target waypoints, giving us some additional functionality for coordinating strikes. We use the formatting as seen here. So for example, on the B2 waypoint, we can add an ingress speed of Mach 0.9. When we are ready to load our flight plan, again we need to select the correct data cartridge from the kneeboard. In this instance, we need to select the cartridge named Cartridge from Marks on F10 Map by, and then your name. Double check that the creation date looks correct before settling on this, as residual flight plans created in the same way for the same map may still appear in the list. I would recommend that you periodically clear these from your saved games folder. Data loading is performed in the same way with ref lolar in 9099, confirmed with lsscu. We can perform our usual sanity check in the same way. One thing I have observed is when loading L2 secondary landing points in this manner and check their reference or coordinates using ref lolar out, this sometimes does not display as expected. However, as we cycle between L1 and L2 using the L-mol button, we can see that the distance gauge adjusts, suggesting that they are programmed for different locations. Again, this method comes with its advantages and limitations. It can obviously be customized to your sortie, which is advantageous for use in multiplayer servers, when you may need to create a flight plan for different mission types at different times. It is map-based when planning, so again is easy to visualize, and is relatively easy to program additional parameters such as the ingress speeds and times on target using the label format. It will, however, obviously take longer to prepare than a pre-planned mission editor flight plan when in-game. You will need to think about what you want to achieve and what you are about to do. Our third method is an auto-generated flight plan against an expected target. Usually, the simulation will automatically generate a number of flight plans based on known enemy assets that you may wish to consider as your target. These are shown on the kneeboard, typically named as Autogenerated Attack, followed by the target type and various data. Alternatively, we can choose our own target location by placing a marker on the F10 map at the target site and labeling this with the word Attack. This will automatically generate a flight plan towards the target and set our attack marker as an M target point. So let's bring up the F10 map, and as an example, say I wish to launch a strike against this EWR site here next to Hatte Airfield. Using the mark labels in a similar way to what we have seen, we are going to place a marker directly over the EWR and label it with the word Attack. This will automatically generate a flight plan consisting of a number of B navigation waypoints prior to the target and a number of B navigation waypoints after the target. However, these will not display on the F10 map as shown previously. Again, when we are ready to load the flight plan, this is selected on the kneeboard. In this instance, we will select Auto-Generated Attack on Marker Position. As the rest of the flight plan is auto-generated, all the other waypoints in the plan, apart from our target point, are arbitrarily positioned, but we can review them on the flight plan sign-out sheet on the kneeboard prior to loading them with the cartridge. As we can see, 2 B waypoints have been generated prior to the target. Our target point is set as waypoint 3, M3, and 2 B navigation waypoints have been generated after the target. The landing point is invariably set at our departure airbase as normal. Data loading is done in the usual manner. Ref lolar in 9099. Confirm with lsscoo. If any of the auto-generated points are not to our liking, we could of course edit them manually using the data panel after loading. This method is obviously very quick. We do not need to think about programming the remainder of the flight plan, only the target. However, to use this method effectively, we obviously need to know the exact, or at minimum the presumed location of the strike target, and be able to mark this on the map. Also, the auto-generated flight plan may not consider the most appropriate route to your target. For example, it may direct you over enemy defenses, or via landscape features that do not offer the most discreet or effective approach. So this method needs to be employed, taking these into consideration. Well, as ever, I hope that was useful for you. Thank you for your patience and all the many messages of support sent to me whilst I have been ill. In our next tutorial, we will look at the manual alteration of cartridge data and delve a little deeper into waypoint parameters that can be set, before finally taking to the skies to fly our flight plans. With heartfelt gratitude to my patrons, especially Jan11, Lakota21, Plabs, Starlover, Ben, and a last-minute shout-out to Rogue RN. Feel free to do the usual thing like subscribe, comment, and share, but until next time, virtual aviators, keep on rocking and keep on flying. This is Reiver saying last call.